Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Fair Housing webinar. My name is Erin Blackman, and I am a planner in the Environment and Development Department at the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and I will be moderating this webinar. This webinar is hosted by NCTCOG in partnership with the Texas Department of Agriculture's Texas Community Development Block Grant Program, or one that I will refer to as TXCDBG. At this time, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items to ensure the webinar runs smoothly. Today's webinar is scheduled to last until about 3 to allow plenty of time for Q&A at the end. As a reminder, please mute your line. Feel free to insert questions in the chat to be addressed at the end. The webinar will be recorded and posted to our website sometime next week. I will send a follow-up email to those of you who registered with a link to the presentation and the recording. If you would like to be included in that email but you did not register, you may send me an email and I will include you as well. So I'm just going to drop my email in the chat. And then here is our agenda today. I'll kick off with a brief overview of its purpose, and then following my presentation, we will hear from Jeffrey Riddle with the Texas Workforce Commission on federal and Texas Fair Housing Acts. His presentation will last about 1 hour, and I will cover topics such as an overview of the acts, common terms, understanding the protected categories, exemptions to the acts, ways to recognize issues, discriminatory practices, understanding disparate impact, reasonable accommodations, modifications, and zoning and land use. The target audience includes local government staff, housing providers, tenants, and other interested individuals. So thank you again for joining us. As I have already mentioned, my name is Erin Blackman, and I'm a planner in the Environment and Development Department at the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Many of you already know, but it is helpful to understand what we do. North Central Texas COG is a voluntary, non-taxing, non-regulatory subdivision of the state for the 4th largest metro area in the U.S. We help more than 230 local government members coordinate and collectively plan in areas such as transportation, emergency preparedness, development issues, environmental improvements, 911, workforce development, aging services, public safety, and the list goes on. We are one of 24 COGs in Texas with a 2022 population of over 8 million people. So our department at COG assists the Texas Department of Agriculture administer the Texas Community Development Block Grant Program's Community Development Fund. This fund provides grant funding to smaller communities for various public improvements. And we are mainly charged with keeping these stakeholders informed, as well as other deliverables, such as offering an event like this to promote fair housing or the overall CDBG goals. And this link, or this presentation is live, and if you hover over the links, you should be able to click directly on them. So if you'd like more information on, what we do for the CDBG program, there is a link on the slide. Okay, so the CDBG goals are listed here and are principally targeted at persons of low to moderate income in order to provide public facilities to meet basic human needs, improve housing conditions, expand economic opportunities for recruiting and for creating and retaining jobs, and provide assistance in public facilities to eliminate conditions hazardous to the public health and of an emergency nature. Fair Housing Month occurs in April and is dedicated to reaffirm commitment to equal opportunity in housing, and affirmatively furthering fair housing is a goal central to the CDBG program. In addition, TDA requires general local governments applying for Texas CDBG funds to affirmatively further fair housing, the main reason for this webinar offering. In addition, Community Development Week is this week, and it is intended to recognize and bring attention to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development CDBG program. The federal CDBG program exists to provide local governments with resources to develop viable urban communities characterized by decent, affordable housing and suitable living environments. It also seeks to expand economic opportunities for persons of low and moderate income. Okay, and that concludes my brief introduction. And if you have any questions related to Texas CDBG program, my contact information is located on this slide. And my email address is also in the chat. So with that, just a reminder to ensure that your microphones are muted. If you have any questions as Jeffrey presents, you may insert them in the chat. And at the end, you may also use the raise hand button when we get to that point. So now,
okay, this is where I'm at.
Okay.
So now I will introduce our speaker. And Jeffrey, I'm going to stop sharing. And if you would like to share your slides. And I'll give you an introduction. So Jeffrey Riddle has over 23 years of experience in training and outreach, having served in the U.S. Army and now working as a training and outreach coordinator for the last 5 years with the Texas Workforce Commission. With a history degree and a passion for knowledge, he's dedicated to helping people and organizations grow. Jeffrey has trained hundreds of employers from various sectors during his time with the Workforce Commission. In addition to his employment training, Jeffrey provides knowledge and understanding of fair housing practices to housing providers and tenants. His focus on connecting with people and bridging gaps has made him a respected and effective speaker. He's passionate about helping organizations succeed by investing in their most valuable resource, their people. All right, Jeffrey, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Erin. I appreciate it. All right. Let's see. All right. Well, I mean, the introduction is already out of the way, but yes, my name is Jeff Riddle, and I am the lead trainer. Joining me in the session today is my coworker Hilsey, who is recently come on board. So, but we make the fair housing team. We make the entire training team. My email's there, and again, this will be captured and emailed. So if anybody has any questions of me, feel free to email me too. Quick disclaimer that everything that is coming out of today's presentation is it's work that is supported by grants from HUD, but everything that in here, opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this material are those of the author, myself, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Housing Department or U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. We're going to be talking about what the laws say, what the acts say. I'm going to give you some good case examples of issues that we run into. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I am not a lawyer. I cannot give anybody here legal advice. I can help you try to work through any type of issues you might be seeing or help you understand what the law says, though I just can't give that legal advice. So as mentioned, I am with the Workforce Commission, specifically in the Civil Rights Division. So we are one of the 13 divisions within the Texas Workforce Commission, and our specific responsibility is both the enforcement and protections of civil rights issues in either an employment or a housing related matter across the entire state of Texas. If you remember, you've been in maybe state government, or if you worked, near it, There used to be the Commission on Human Rights, but they went away in 2015, and all of its responsibilities got moved over to the Workforce Commission, which is really easy when I put on my employment training hat and talk about employment training, because workforce and that's employers, and I'm giving employment training. When I put on my fair housing hat, everybody's like, wait a minute, you're the Workforce Commission. What do you have to do with fair housing? Well, it's just all of those basic, civil rights protections just moved under the Workforce Commission. The way I simply look at it is, yeah, employees have to live somewhere, and we protect that as well. So, we help enforce those protections on no matter where you live or where you work. We have two separate teams of investigators. They, to use a Ghostbusters reference, they don't cross the streams. We have a housing team who specifically investigates housing complaints. We have an employment team who specifically investigates employment complaints that we receive, again, from across the state. When I'm not doing, these webinars, I'm doing in-person sessions. I mean, just in the course of the next week, I'll be Frisco, and then all the way down into the valley to the McAllen area. So, we cover the entire area of the state. There are some cities that do have their own specific offices in their own jurisdiction. The city of Austin being one, city of Dallas being another one, that have their own investigators in their own city offices. And then the outreach and compliance team is specifically what me and my coworker do. We try to get the information out there because they say the best prevention, or the best cure is prevention. That one got away from me. I apologize for that one. There was an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. There we go. Sorry, that one got away from me. So we're out there talking to housing providers. We're out there talking to city governments and the like to try to prevent informing tenants of their rights. Same with the employment level side as well. Just kind of, again, understanding, we work hand in hand with HUD and the EEOC. We're specifically talking about fair housing related issues today. It's important to note that, a process in our housing thing is, again, just like how, the training team, we want to try to prevent complaints. It's also important to understand that, the way we operate, when a complaint comes to us, we're also a housing complaint. We're also trying to work on conciliating that issue. An investigator, during the course of their investigation, is also concurrently working with both parties to try to find a resolution to that complaint before that investigation finishes. Because once that's finished, then it goes to court processes and everything else. But if we can settle that matter between both parties, and we're going to talk about a little bit how that can help be facilitated without our involvement, because our job is to put our investigators out of a job. We will definitely try to do that. It's part of the processes that, and it's something important to know that we are providing this, and it is Fair Housing Month. We've been doing numerous fair housing presentations through the course of this month for different entities, and we still have many more over the course of the next week. But also, things that we do, and again, information will be posted at the end, is we do provide free monthly webinars over fair housing related issues. And again, these are free and open to the public. If you go to our website and look for fair housing training, you'll find a link to register. And again, we host these every first and third Tuesday of the month, where we go into, what is fair housing? What are reasonable accommodations? Some of the stuff that we are going to be talking about today, we provide that. Everything but zoning and land use we don't do, because generally those audiences are more tenants and housing providers. So we don't necessarily go so far into that. But we do conduct these. And if you ever have any questions or would like specific training, you can email us as well, and we can provide specific training, or you can join one of our webinars. So everything today that we are going to be talking about is coming out of the acts, both the federal and the Texas Fair Housing Act. The Federal Fair Housing Act was signed in 1968, 4 years after the Civil Rights Act for employment level matters. Both of them were signed by a Texas-born U.S. president. LBJ, unfortunately, his namesake is attached to probably one of the worst highways in the Dallas area. I know. I grew up across the entire Metroplex, from Arlington, Alvarado, all the way as far east as Rockwall and Greenville. So I feel the pain. I looked at that map. I'm like, oh, I know that entire area. So his name's attached to it, but he did kick off our civil rights protections, both employment and in housing. Originally, there were 5 protected categories. We have added the additional 2 over the subsequent years through various amendments and acts. Now, when we talk about the federal and the Texas Fair Housing Act, there is no major difference between the two. Baseline protections obviously are going to be the same. In Texas, we haven't added any other additional protections on top of federal law, except for one little like kind of asterisk that I'll cover when we get to that specific protected category. But we haven't added a lot of extra, protections. So state law and federal law are substantially equivalent. So through the course of this presentation, I won't be like highlighting the difference between the two because there is no major difference. They both say the same thing. They mean the same thing. The verbiage is exactly the same. So I'll probably just refer to it as the acts or basically the law. So when we talk about fair housing, what does that actually encompass? What is fair housing? First and foremost, fair housing is your rent sale terms and conditions. This is typically what most people think of when we talk about fair housing related issues. It's trying to buy a home, trying to sell a home, trying to rent an apartment, to lease a townhome, to ask for a reasonable accommodation due to a disability. That makes up the bulk of issues that we generally see because, again, we are the agency who receives complaints, but it's the main focus of fair housing. Letting somebody have a place where, not only do they get the use of their domicile, but the enjoyment as well. But fair housing also covers publication. So if in the scope of, my realtor business or me leasing out my home or my condo or my townhome, I am making discriminatory statements. I am turning people away due to who they are as a person, that publication aspect. I can't say that I will not rent my home to, people without kids, because as we're going to find out, that is one of the protected categories. But having that statement, that is what publication covers. And obviously, when it was written, it was probably talking about print ads and wanted ads. But now, it does still encompass any type of publication, whether it's, social media or using Zillow or Redfin or one of those. Inspection is also part of it. So, a person doesn't have to have the home or apartment, again, to be protected under this law. Inspection, to be able to view a unit, to be able to, again, inspect. I would like to go view this apartment. I would like to go look at that house, and to be turned away from that, again, be discriminated, denied that because of who they are as a person is going to be covered under this. So they don't have to have, a leasing agreement or a rental agreement in order to be covered. That inspection aspect, they can't be turned away from it as well. And then brokerage services and loans and financial assistance are kind of in the same boat. And that being that, if a broker within the scope of their duties is treated differently, for instance, Jeff, because of, who you are as a person, we're going to just have you work this specific area because those are your people over there. And I think that would work really well for you because those are your people and you understand your people. That's, again, being based in who I am as a person and not what I can do. And same with loans and financial assistance in that matter. Having to set a higher deposit or down payment because of, your kind of people, I've been burned by them in the past. So I'm going to require a little bit more from you up front. Not that it depends on, if it depends on credit histories and incomes and, all of those things, those are tangibles that everybody, no matter who they are, those are facts. But if it's, based on, again, who a person is, then we're getting into that, discriminatory acts. So unlawful actions, discriminatory acts. Discrimination is our first word that I'm going to be using through the course of this presentation. I already used it a couple of times. Discrimination happens when a person, an individual, groups of individuals, as we're going to come to find out, are treated differently because of who they are, their protected category. Now that could be something as simple as turning somebody, a family away from renting out my home because I really don't feel like having destructive kids in my house that I rent, because then I have to do all kinds of repairs. I mean, it could be something small and minor as that, where they have another house lined up or another apartment down the way, to one of those big things where um, cities or major property management companies are having complaints filed against them or being sued for issues arising in discriminatory practices. Interference and retaliation are basically what happens if somebody's fair housing rights are violated and they try to bring this issue up. A person housing, typically it's housing providers more, is who they kind of tailor to, cannot prevent a person from exercising their right to address a fair housing issue, nor can they treat them differently because they have filed a fair housing issue. And that could be, at the lowest level, with just their immediate, property management company or their apartment manager, all the way up to one of us lettered agencies, us and HUD. You can't prevent them from exercising their right to make a complaint and address an issue, nor can you treat them differently because they have done so. The law does protect them and allows them that right to be able to address issues. So there are 7 protected categories under the law. Those are race, color, national origin, familial status, religion, sex, and disability. Out of these, some of these we know out of also these 7, everybody belongs to at least 5 of these 7. 2 do have some specific requirements that do need to be met. But under the other 5, it is just naturally who we are. Everybody has a racial category. There are 5 racial categories as defined by the federal government. They are African American, Asian, Native American or Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. Those are our 5 racial categories. Generally, everybody knows their racial category. We're always asked that, whether we're filling out the job application or we're signing up for our local gas station's 5 cents off rewards program. They're probably getting that kind of identifiable information. And so everybody generally knows their racial category. But a good example of racial issues in a fair housing related practice is, if you remember, just a few years back, I say a few years back, we're already in 2025, but it was 2021, 2022, when the housing market just went extremely crazy and, homes were going for 2-3 times their normal amount. I would say the issues that were arising were more national level than they were here in the state of Texas, which is a good thing. But there was difference in appraisals based on the racial category of the person who was selling the home. In one specific case, there was a African American family who was going to put their house up for sale. And they had an appraiser come out, and the appraiser appraised their home for, say, like $250,000, where every other home in the neighborhood was going for well over $400,000 in their appraisals. So, they basically, over the course of the next week, kind of scrubbed themselves from the home. Pictures, identifiable things, just kind of made the home completely neutral. And in this specific situation, they also had a friendly, a friend that was a couple. Saying that, it's kind of weird. Come and stand in, and they had the home reappraised by a different appraiser. And then within the week, the only thing having been done in that house was basically make it neutral and scrub the racial category of the person living there. That home was now being appraised a week later for $400,000 or more. And again, the only thing that changed was the racial category of the individual selling the home. I can tell you, here in Texas, when there was those cases becoming an issue and making the spotlight, we partnered with the Texas Licensing Appraisal Board to provide some additional training to maybe get ahead. Not that we'd seen the issues, but again, prevention is better than curing something. So we kind of got ahead of the game here. Now, color is the protected category that is often confused or associated with race, but color, the pigmentation of our skin, is different from race because inside those racial categories, if you think about it, we have seen people of varying skin colors from the lightest shade to the darkest shade and everything in between. And so color is there when those potential issues are grouped by people who maybe share a similar skin color, whether they might be more predominant inside their racial category and they are treated differently than those who are maybe lighter or even darker shade inside that category. So it's when there are groups of people based in, the predominance of their skin color are treated differently over the entirety of a racial category. And then national origin. So national origin is a good way of saying fancily ethnicity. When we think of ethnicity, it could be anything from those regions being Eastern European. It could be those specific countries being, Mexican, being Hispanic or Latino, being Puerto Rican, being Polish. All of those, that's our ethnicity. Our national origin covers those aspects of us, whether they be a cultural belief and trait, a linguistic characteristic or trait, or even a physical characteristic or trait about a person based in, again, where we have come from, because everybody has come from somewhere. And at some point in time, our ancestors moved to America. And if we still have those differences in, traits, whether they again be physical or linguistic or characteristic, like we can't turn somebody away because they might need a leasing agreement translated because they don't understand all the words because English is their second language. I don't have time to mess with that. I'm not going to deal with this. We're not going to rent to you. That would be seen as being discriminatory against somebody based on their national origin. We've seen issues where people of different ethnicities who don't get along make decisions based in those differences. Like we had a case in Houston where the owners of an apartment complex who were Pakistani were refusing to rent to anybody who was from India because of a deep-seated animosity between those two countries. It can also take, a lot of times, I see a common practice among housing providers is screening programs. And, they use a third-party screener for, background checks and stuff like that. We had a case where a young lady who'd been living overseas married a foreign national and got, INS, green cards, all that documentation, came back home here to America, came back here specifically to Texas. And they were going to rent an apartment. And, both names were on the lease. Obviously, she had a social security number and so on and so forth. He did not. I mean, he just had INS. That obviously where it says social security number was blank, but everything else was filled out according to, all the proper documentation. That apartment complex sent all their information to their third-party screening background. Obviously, she came back, she had no arrests, no convictions, no nothing on her record. Her record was clean. He came back with absolutely nothing because obviously he didn't have a social. He had also never been living here in America before. So there was just nothing on him. Not even like he didn't have anything. There was just nothing. And that apartment complex denied them living there because this guy had no record because their third party, screening agency was like, yeah, this person doesn't have a record. We don't know what's going on with them. And then they denied him. That would have been that was a national origin issue because it was based in him being from somewhere else. Familial status is our first of those two. I said not everybody's going to belong to. Familial status, you do have to have a child to belong to this protected category. Now, that child can be from pregnancy all the way through the age of 18. Now, if your 20-something-year-old child is still living with you and going to school, that's okay. That's fine. But if you can't claim them for taxes, you can't claim them for familial status, even if your kids are still living at the house with you. It has to be pregnancy through the age of 18. Now, it could be biological children, it could be fostering, it could be adoption, guardianship, wards, if wards are still a thing. I don't know, that might be an older term. But All of those are covered under familia status. And families cannot be treated differently because they have families. A lot of times this takes, practice in maybe higher security deposits for people with kids because kids are inherently more destructive. That's basing that deposit in somebody's aspect of being a family. That would be discrimination because it's against a family unit. Setting policies that, like no skateboard riding, no bicycle riding, none of that. It's okay to protect our residents, but to completely outlaw practices that kids do would be discriminatory to people with children as opposed to other people. Setting policies in the pool, like no children in the pool or spa, would be a discriminatory practice. Again, we can set rules and guidelines, but we shouldn't just outright, deny those type of activities to people with children. And then our next one is religion. So religion is still one that everybody's going to belong to, and I say that because if you have a religious ethic or moral belief about right or wrong, that is what the religious protected category covers. So it covers, our Protestant or Methodist or Catholicism or Baptist or Jehovah's Witness or Judaism, Muslim. All of those are encompassed in this, but it also encompasses your atheist, your agnostic, your Church of Scientology, pagans and Wiccans, and all of that is going to be part of our religion. So again, it's a religious ethic or moral belief about right or wrong. And a lot of times, this one specifically comes up with issues where the most common one that I hear of is religious decorations. If I have a cross outside, my apartment complex door, and my neighbor across the street has a pentagram, and some people are offended by seeing that pentagram, so they go to the apartment manager and like, hey, yeah, that's kind of offending me. And the apartment manager is like, hey, Jeff, yeah, that's it's causing an issue. We're going to need you to take that down. But my neighbor still gets to leave their cross. We can't pick and choose what religions, are okay and acceptable to have, decorations of. It would be, one or all of those. We can't set those. And it goes for apartment complexes. It goes for HOAs, anybody within that scope of fair housing. If, my neighbor has a nativity scene and I have something of a different religious faith, my HOA can't be like, well, that one is not, holding to our standard, but the nativity scene is. It's one or, we can't pick just one that we follow. It would have to be one or all of them or none of them. I could get that out. All or none. Our sex protected category covers aspects of being male or female, or sex. It also includes sexual harassment as well. When we talk about being, a man or a woman, that would be the difference in treating men differently. We're really guy heavy in this area, so we're gonna not rent out to any more guys, or could be steering in apartment complexes where only certain units are shown to maybe a certain sex and not to others. I've seen this play out specifically in a young lady who had just graduated high school and was going to college at one of the big metropolitan areas, and she was touring an apartment. And at the end of the tour, the apartment manager, who was also a female, asked that young lady, she was like, so, I got a question. Do you have a guy, husband, boyfriend, male significant other in your life who might be staying with you? She probably thought it was a trick question to see if there was anybody on the lease. I don't know. But she's like, no, it's just me, come moving here, going to college, first apartment, so on and so forth. And the apartment manager is like, well, this is a very bad area for a young lady such as yourself to live in. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to rent to you. You're going to have to go look somewhere else. As we're going to talk about, sometimes the best of intentions can still lead to a discriminatory practice. And here, absolutely, the best of intentions still led to discrimination because she was not able to rent there because she was a girl, a woman. a young lady. If it was 18-year-old me who probably couldn't have put his hand through a wet paper sack back then, nothing would have been said because I was a guy and I should have been able to take care of myself. But in this situation, that decision was taken from her because she was a female. When we talk about sexual harassment is protected under the Fair Housing Act as well, with either a hostile environment or a quid pro quo type of situation exists. Hostile environment means where a person is subjected to sufficiently severe or pervasive, unwelcome sexual conduct. That could be, verbal, the jokes, the whistling, the leering, stuff like that. And it could also be quid pro quo. And quid pro quo means this for that. And this is where there is some type of housing related service or activity for some type of sexual favor. And it could be either a positive or negative thing. We could be, in the grips of our third or fourth, fall, summer or fall, and my AC goes out. My maintenance supervisor's like, yeah, well, Jeff, I can bump you up to the top of the list and be out there in the next 30 minutes if you send me some naked pictures of yourself. I mean, I'm getting a benefit for that, but it is still quid pro quo sexual harassment, just the same as if I am threatened with eviction if I don't sleep with my housing provider. That is an aspect of quid pro quo. And again, it doesn't have to be, it could be either negative or positive. We don't have to wait for it to happen for it to be sexual harassment. Just enough that that conversation is held is enough for it to be sexual harassment. And then our last protected category is the disability protected category. This one's important because 60 to 70% of our complaints over any given month specifically come out of this protected category. This is the last of the two that not everybody is going to be a member of. For this one, you do have to meet one of three requirements. And that is, have a mental or physical substantial limitation to a major life activity, have a record of such, or be treated as having an impairment. Now, a major life activity is anything that you do in life. Most of those things you are doing right now: hearing, seeing, breathing, walking, talking, learning. Your body's ability to maintain its own internal bodily functions are all major life activities. And anything that substantially limits that, impairs that, is going to be seen as a disability. Now, some disabilities are very obvious. I can tell when that person is walking in with a white cane and maybe, a guide dog, that they are blind. That individual with hearing aids in their ear, that person in a wheelchair or some type of mobility assisted device. We can tell that. Not every disability is going to be obvious or known to much of anybody. There are a lot of different disabilities. Asthmas, heart disease, cancers, diabetes. I mean, they're all different types of disabilities because they affect a major life activity. And you may never know a person has that. There may not be any outward signs. It may not always be affecting them, but it could still be a disability if it is substantially limiting that major life activity. And then if a person is treated as if they have a disability and they are treated differently based on a perceived disability, the law does protect those individuals as well. But as a good rule of thumb, nobody can require a person to disclose a disability. So nobody can ask about it. I can't be like, do you have a disability? Does anybody living there have a disability? But nobody also has to say anything. I don't have to be like, I have a disability, just want to let you know. So if nobody can ask about it, nobody has to say anything about it, then really we should just treat everybody the same and not assume anything. And if we do that, then we'll never run afoul of that, being regarded portion of the disability protected category. Now, kind of jumping off from that, what are some of the big issues that I see? So again, 60 to 70% of our complaints come specifically from a housing provider failing to accommodate for an individual with a disability. There are two types of reasonables, and I say reasonable because it does have to be reasonable for both parties. There is a reasonable accommodation and there is a reasonable modification. And accommodation is generally going to be provided by the housing provider through a change, exception, adjustment to some type of rule, policy, practice, or service. Think about pet policies. So, my HOA has, a policy of no chickens. This was an actual case. And my child who is autistic had, was really, responding well to this chicken. And so, hey, we have a request that, like we have this chicken. Not we have a whole bunch of free range chickens all over the neighborhood or our backyard, but we do have this chicken. That could be, where we are making that exception, that change to that policy. Having emotional support animals or a service animal is going to be exempting those pet policies. Assigned parking is another big one where, there are, obviously ADA parking spots. A lot of times those are near where business is conducted, maybe like an apartment manager's office or, something like that. And if we assign those to a resident, then we need to have some more. So we probably just don't assign them and it's first come, first serve. But there could be somebody that, is like, hey, due to a disability, mobility impairment, seeing impairment, can I have a parking spot that is assigned to me? That's just, making that change. It might open the door for other questions, but we're not going to let other people know about other people's accommodation. When we do talk about accommodations, we can't set extra terms and conditions on those accommodations as well. We had a case where an individual needed to use the pool after 10 o'clock at night, but the gate was closed. They basically, locked the gate to the pool area at 10 o'clock. And if we know, Texas summers, the sun doesn't go down to like 9:30 in the heat of summer. And this individual could not be out in the sun for, extended periods of time with exposed skin. So that's why they were asking to use the pool. And the answer that Complex had was, okay, well, we can unlock that gate, but because of no staff being there and insurance policies being what they are, we're going to have to hire some additional security, and we're going to offset some of that cost by increasing your rent. That is setting an extra term and condition on that reasonable accommodation request and would be illegal or infringing upon the rights of other individuals. College Town, one of those, we share, common living areas, living room, kitchen, stuff like that, but they have their own rooms. Two individuals had cats, not under the table, pet fees, pet deposits, everything was on board with that. A third person came in, inspected, said, yes, I want to rent from here, rented that third room. Within a month, their allergies started acting up. They asked for a reasonable accommodation. And the apartment complex was like, okay, 2 residents, you have to get rid of your cats as an accommodation to this other individual because of their allergies. That's infringing upon the rights of other individuals to accommodate another one. No, in that situation, they should have moved that one who was having the allergies to another unit that didn't have animals in it. A reasonable modification is going to be a physical change to a structure or a dwelling. So an accommodation is changes, it could involve something physical, but most of the time it's going to be provided for. When we talk about reasonable modifications, that is a physical change. We are altering something. Typically speaking, reasonable modifications are going to be at the tenant's own expense. There are some exceptions to that. If you're a 504 property, TDHCA, low income housing tax credit, there's some other considerations, but for general practical purposes, if you're not under any kind of special program, the tenant is going to be paying for that. Now, typical, as you see, the two on the slide, accessible ramps and grab bars, are the biggest modifications that I hear about. I do occasionally hear about standing bathtubs and different toilets for those with disabilities. And it is out there. It's just not as commonplace as maybe, accessibility ramps and grab bars in the bathroom. Now, the thing about it is, again, tenants own expense. That doesn't mean they have to go do it all themselves. They're just having to pick up the tab. Now, if they're Bob Vila, they can absolutely go and do whatever they need to do, go down to Home Depot, get the parts, add grab bars in the bathroom. But if they're more of a Tim the Toolman Taylor, and they will probably destroy something in the process, if maintenance has to go out there, if a general contractor has to go out there, they're going to pick up that tab for the work that is going to be done. But a key aspect to both of these words is reasonable. It does have to be reasonable for both parties. It can't be reasonable for one and unreasonable for another. And that, there does have to be that middle ground. I've been looking online and I think this is absolutely what I need, but it may not work for my provider. They may not have the resources or the financial means to do that. And so there does have to be that discussion and find something that is going to be reasonable for both parties. But it is very important to understand that the law does state that housing providers have to make reasonable accommodations or allow for modifications when it may be necessary to afford a person with a disability an equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. Use and enjoy a dwelling is very important here because it's not just the simple use of it, but also the enjoyment. When you think about it, it's a use maybe for a ramp. I can't get into without a ramp there. But when you think of grab bars or maybe a different type of toilet that is higher or shorter, that might just be enjoyment. You could still use the other one, but it is kind of difficult due to a disability. So there's where that enjoyment. Also, it's very important to note too, specifically on this one, that may be necessary. It's important to note that may be necessary means that there has to be what the law refers to as a nexus. That means there has to be a relationship to what is being impaired to what is being requested. Having a disability doesn't allow a person to request anything that they want. If I'm on the 5th floor of a stairwell only apartment complex and my emotional support animal that is there to support my mental health disorder, that is maybe necessary. I have the paperwork, there's documentation. I am exempting pet policies to have my emotional support animal. But my animal also doesn't like to walk up and down the stairs. I got to carry it, and it's getting kind of difficult and awkward. But hey, I have a disability. That dog's here to support my disability. I can request to move down a different floor as a reasonable accommodation request because that dog's there to support my disability. No, there's no correlation. There is no impairment that says you cannot move up and down the stairs in this situation. So you don't get the disability related request because there has to be that relationship between what is being impaired to what is being requested. Because I feel more questions over any given presentation over animals. Just I want to quickly run through that so everybody kind of understands what are assistance animals, because there are two different types. There's our emotional support animals and our service dogs. But a lot of times in questions I get about animals and housing or homes or apartments, a lot of times I hear the words ADA thrown out, the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act. But that only covers service dogs in areas of public accommodation. And public accommodation means where business is conducted. So if you think about it, within the scope of fair housing, the only types of places that business is conducted is my apartment manager's office, my property manager's office. Those are areas where business is conducted. Our council government meetings and stuff like that. That is where business is conducted. Everywhere else is not business is conducted. And so the Americans with Disabilities Act does not cover those areas. And it also says specifically service dogs in areas of public accommodation, emotional support animals are not covered under the ADA. It is service dogs, so they're there trained to do a task. Now, but for the fair housing issue, that is a reasonable accommodation request, as we just covered. It has nothing to do with the Americans with Disabilities Act, because Fair Housing Act covers reasonable accommodations, which is what that would be, because we are trying to exempt or change that pet policy where we are staying or living. And so we would fall back to those aspects that we just talked about, not the Americans with Disabilities Act, unless I was turned away from bringing my service dog in to pay my monthly bill. Now, as I mentioned, the two different types of animals is a service animal, which is specifically a dog, but it is trained to do a specific task. Like, your guide dogs, your dogs that are there to detect, like epileptic seizures and stuff like that in an individual. Your emotional support animals is all those other things. They could be trained or untrained. They're there to perform some function, whether it be therapeutic support or maybe some other type of support for an individual. There's a person who had a capuchin monkey who would open up the individual's medicine bottles. It's not a dog, even though it was trained to do a task. So it's more of the support animals over a service animal, even though it was trained to do a specific task. Most of the time, a lot of what, falls into fair housing related issues is our emotional support type animal side of the house. But, and there's been cases not only for it to be those domesticated animals you see at the bottom, but as I mentioned earlier, chickens, pot-bellied pigs. There have been cases made where, if it is more of those exotic type of animals, there does need to be some type of documentation on the necessity for those type of non-common household related pets and animals. There are a couple exceptions to the Fair Housing Act. And again, acts, plural. That is if a person owns three or more properties or single family homes at one time. And they are, if I'm selling my home, I can put a for sale sign and I can sell it to whomever it is that I want for whatever reason that I want and whatever whim and whatever belief I have, I can do that. Now, if I do make, if my Craigslist ad has a bunch of discriminatory statements in it, the Fair Housing Act, is going to get me. But if I'm just, selling it, I'm like, I don't want that family I see drive up renting it. No, I can turn you away. There's that, number of properties. If the owner is living there and renting out their rooms, a la like Jimmy Stewart's mom and It's a Wonderful Life, again, they can rent out to those rooms to whomever they want based on whatever whim it is they want. But with both of those first two exemptions, the minute you engage a service outside of yourself, those exemptions go away. Your exemptions do not get to be acquired by another party. Like there was a individual who was going to rent out their home and they reached out to, the property management company to have their home added to their portfolio. But they're one of the stipulations was like, hey, like we don't want anybody with young kids living there. Older kids is okay, but nobody with young kids. If they were just renting out their home, they could do that if they wanted to. But once they engage that property management company, that exemption doesn't transfer. That property management company is bound by fair housing laws and wouldn't have been able to do that because that would have gone against the familia status. Housing for the elderly, if we have the communities, whether it's a assisted living type facility, it's our multifamily dwellings, or it's our senior living communities with the golf courses and the ponds and the walking trails. If it's specifically designed and operated for senior people, there's a couple of different ones. If it's for the care of those that are elderly, or if 80% of the units have somebody who is above the age of 55, or it's specifically designed for those above the age of 62, it is a housing for the elderly. And if my family members pass away, I obviously, I get their home. Me and my family can't go move into that community because it is specifically designated for senior living. So we would have to sell that home or something. We can't go move in there because it is designated for elderly individuals. And then religious organizations and private clubs are two sides of the same coin. If a religious organization or a private club own a home, an apartment, or something along those lines, they can rent it out, sell it to their own people at the exclusion of everybody else because it is owned by that organization or club. If they ever put it up publicly, then they lose that exemption because if the local Catholic church owns a couple of apartments, their members can come and go as those as they see fit because it is owned by that church. But if they're decided, like we're going to go ahead and sell these and get out of the real estate game, they can't be like we're going to only sell it to other people who are Catholic, because then the religious protected category does come into play, and the same effect for private clubs. They're just two sides of the same coin. So, fair housing issues for local governments. First and foremost, how does the Fair Housing Act, both federal and state, apply to like local land use and zoning issues? The key takeaway from this is so the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution enables federal law such as the Fair Housing Act to take precedence over conflicting state and local laws. Obviously, federal level is the law of the land, and they would take precedence over those conflicting state and local laws. So, the Fair Housing Act is the law of the land and would override any of those other more local, state, county, municipality issues. It does apply to buildings intended for occupancy of residence. Again, multifamily dwellings, single-family dwellings, and it could also take into effect that vacant land that can be developed into residences, because obviously, especially as being from the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, you can't grow internally anymore. So, we're pushing out further and further. And so, seeing that, man, I'm trying to think, I was going to say Salina, but I mean, Salina is no longer, a farming, ranching, hunting area anymore. It's all grown. But at one time, right, that land. And so if we're going to rezone that for all those new master plan communities, that was vacant land at one time, and it would apply to that if it's going to be developed into residences. And again, whether it's single family or multi-family. So when does land use and zoning laws, when can it potentially violate the Fair Housing Acts? So, if we are prohibiting or restricting the development of housing based on a protected category. So as like an example, there's a moratorium on the development of multifamily housing due to fears that residents could include a particular class. So, we're not going to allow for that development. There's a bid put in, and this is, it's going to provide housing to this particular class. One of the protected categories, it could be, people of different national origins or race or colors. And so, no, we're not going to allow that. That would be going against that protected category for prohibiting that development of housing. Enforcing neutral laws or policies differently because of residents' protected class. So, if the law is the law, but if we apply it only to certain areas, if code enforcement is only working in certain neighborhoods and not across the entire city, based on maybe the protected category of the residents of those different areas, then again, we're running into those issues where we are treating people differently based in their protected category. So, we've got to make sure, again, everything is equal. Don't let code enforcement, if you have that specific, I know some cities do and some cities don't, then you have HOAs and all of that other stuff. Spread the wealth around and not just focus in specific areas. Obviously, you might have areas of concern and you can work those areas, but you can't do that at the exception of everything else. And then imposing housing restrictions due to alleged public safety concerns based on stereotypes concerning members in a protected category. A like this could be, there's a lot of times where there was a HUD level policy called the discriminatory effects doctrine. And what that kind of basically is are are we maybe setting a policy of practice or something along those lines, or a law, or allowing for development, um, and we have a practical purpose that is there to provide good. But is there a way where we can change that by opening the door to other residents? And so, I don't want to, um, rent out here, or, I don't want to put a development here because it's going to attract, these kind of people with criminal backgrounds, and everybody there's got arrest or something like that. But, but we have to think about, like, our arrest convictions. And, that's where that discriminatory effects doctrine is kind of coming into play. Is, can we alter, our ideas or changes to still affect and protect residents, but opening the door for other individuals to enjoy housing, or even housing related services? Imposing restrictions or additional conditions on group housing for persons with disabilities and not on other groups. So, like an example, requiring occupancy permits for persons with disabilities to live in a single family home, but not for others, would be going against that disability protected category by imposing those restrictions. So again, we have to make sure that, we are treating everybody equally, and not, just specifically focusing on individualized groups, especially if they are a protected category group. And then refusing to provide necessary reasonable accommodations to policies that prevent persons with disability from using and enjoying housing. Because again, remember, enjoying housing is a key aspect. It's not just the use, but also the enjoyment. And that could be, like denying a request to modify a setback requirement so an accessible sidewalk or ramp can be provided for one or more persons with a mobility impairment. Or not waiving an ordinance that limits the number of unrelated persons in a single family home as a reasonable accommodation. Another one I heard just recently, and it depends on, again, jurisdictions and cities and municipalities. But a lot of cities and municipalities have keeping sidewalks clear of basically impairment. So if I'm parking, the multiple cars that I have, and they're in my driveway, but the driveway's blocking the sidewalk, it's important to think about those kind of aspects as well, especially from, maybe like a code enforcement because the case came to us in a kind of weird way, because it was an HOA request to keep the sidewalks, but the HOA doesn't have really a part to play in it. It's really more of a city municipality issue, because that is usually probably a city or code enforcement practice. And the reason to think about that is there could be somebody in that neighborhood that is in has a mobility impairment. And so, and a lot of communities now have gone to group mailboxes. They don't have individual mailboxes. So if I got to take my wheeled cart, scooter, there's another word I was looking for, but now there's cars blocking the sidewalk. So now I'm having to maneuver down the side, somebody's driveway into the road. I could tip. I might get hit by, there's that impairment where I could hit by another car because my mobility impairment. I should be able to get to my mailbox, which could be absolutely a city kind of municipality concern when we are looking, at those kind of requests. And then, no matter the type of issue that we might be facing as a city or county municipality, it's very important to think about so intentional discrimination is specifically targeting an individual or groups of individuals based in like impacts or historical backgrounds, legislative or administrative history of treating individuals different because of who they are based in that protected category. But this is where it's targeted. Intentional discrimination is that disparate treatment. You're specifically targeting, groups of individuals based in a protected category and treating them differently. And then you have unintentional discrimination, and that could be where we're setting a policy again that we think it's going to be for the betterment of everybody, but there is that disparate impact. It is negatively affecting individuals based in that protected category. So it could be when we're looking at land and zone use practicing. If it's going to cause or could predictably cause a disparate impact on groups of people. It creates, increases, reinforces, or perpetuates segregated housing patterns because of that protected class. And it is important to note that state or local governments do have the opportunity to show that practice is necessary if it is going to achieve a substantial, legitimate, non-discriminatory interest, and those interests must be supported by evidence. This is what we believe, but it does have to have that evidence backing it. Like, this is our end state, and this is what we want it to achieve, and this is what we think is going to happen. But it does have to be supported by evidence. If we're zoning this for a specific group, that could be at the detriment to other groups. But if there's we have again we show why we're doing that and it's supported by evidence, then it's not going to be challenged. And this practice does not violate the act if the interest could not be served by another practice with a less discriminatory effect, which is that discriminatory effects rule that we were talking about earlier. And then some examples of unintentional discrimination. It could be creating or reinforcing a minimum floor space or lot size requirement that increases the size and cost of housing. This could constitute a violation because that increase potentially has the effect of excluding people from a locality or neighborhood because of their membership in a protected category without a legally sufficient justification. Building, bigger homes and lot sizes is going to obviously increase the price of that, which could price a lot of people out of it. But if there's not this is a reason why we're doing that. It's just we're doing that maybe to specifically price. That could be that, that zoning, requirement that is going to potentially could be discriminatory in its effect. And then prohibiting low income or multifamily housing without a legally sufficient justification. We're just not going to allow that, low income housing here or, housing that allows voucher programs in this area just because we don't want those kind of people in this area. That would, again, be that unintentional discriminatory effect, probably against one or multiple protected categories. Something to look at too, and it's relatively new if you don't know about it. So there will potentially be a link. If not, I'll tell you where to find it. But Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, the other side, they work also with housing. Just at the end, I think it was November of last year, so not too long ago, 6 months ago, published their analysis of impediments for 2024. And it's probably going to be the standard going forward for the next couple of years until they reanalyze it. But there's a lot of good information in there. But I'm going to tell you, don't read the whole thing. It's like 600 pages or maybe 3. Just skip to the very end. There's a lot of good information in the end of, these are analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And there's a lot of good information in there, and food for thought. One of them I wanted to include in today's presentation, and that was their number 12 analysis of impediments. And the analysis of impediments, they say, should incorporate the Texas organization's projects for rights to fair housing. And that is the right to choose where they live in a decent and affordable home, regardless of their protected category. Their right to stay in the neighborhood and enjoy improving conditions without fear of being involuntarily displaced by gentrification. The right to equal treatment by their government and private institutions, and their right to have a say in government policies that impact them, their home, and their neighborhoods. And so, this was part of the analysis of impediments, and it's, hey, we should incorporate this eventually in their next one, which could be a couple of years, but, these are good, just it's still a good thing to look at and be like, yep, these are some fundamental rights to, fair housing, to being able to use and enjoy your home, your dwelling, your house, apartment, what have you. And then some final considerations. So, first and foremost, I do want to just, with a lot of the things that we talked about when it comes to fair housing, a lot of it can be summed up in thinking about intent and impact. If the intention is with the best of intentions and we are really looking out for our community and our residents and our neighbors, but the impact is still discriminatory, it's still discriminatory. The best of intentions that leads to a discriminatory practice is still a discriminatory practice. The intentions do not wipe away what happened. Well, I didn't mean to do that, or I had the best, my community's best interest in mind. If it's still discriminatory, it is still discriminatory. So it's always important to think about how it's going to affect people, not why we're putting it in place. When we're looking at policies or procedures or land use, I started saying land use and zoning at the exact same time. But it is important that we look at what the effects are, not why we're doing that when we are looking at things, because the impact is always going to be more important. If it is discrimination, doesn't matter why, it matters what. So there is a link. Maybe that's only on my slide, I'm not sure, but if not, you can go to TDHCA or just Google TDHCA analysis of impediments. You'll be taken to that specific page, because not that a lot of our government pages are very confusing, but sometimes it may take multiple clicks, where if you just Google it, you'll go straight to that page. And again, skip to the end. There's a lot of good information in there about impediments to fair housing choice, barriers that could be there. And it's a good starting point to have the discussions of how maybe we can lift barriers to fair housing for all of our residents. And then the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, specifically, when we're looking at if you are a housing provider and you fall under Section 504, look that up again, because there's a lot of information in there on some requirements that are not there for non-504 operating properties, especially when we talk about reasonable accommodations and modifications. And basically, housing providers are on the hook for providing those, whether they foot the bill for them or what have you, if you are a Section 504. So it is, if you are one of those, refamiliarize yourself with that. Reach out to me if you have any questions about it. I can point you probably in the right direction. And thank you, Aaron. Yes, Google for me while we were talking, and put it into the chat. But that brings me to the end. We have about 20 or so minutes. If there's anybody with any questions, I'm free. If not, my email is also there if you think of a question later. If you're not sure about something, shoot me an email. I say I'm always available. My email is always open. I might be on the road, and if I'm driving from McAllen all the way up to Frisco, that's a long drive, and I might be out of the loop for a few days, so I might get to you not immediately, but I will try to respond as fast as I can.
All right, thank you, Jeff. I know that I learned a lot, and I hope that you all on the call did as well. So we do have time for questions, and you can feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you, or if you want to insert your question into the chat, I'll read it off to Jeff. But Jeff, I have a question. I was just kind of wondering if you could speak a little more about kind of how affordable housing might relate to fair housing. I know you had a slide on that, but if you have any additional comments.
So that specifically, a lot of, depending on the application of that, that might be more in like a Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs specific area. Really what it comes down to, what we're looking at and what we're covering. is again, if there is discrimination occurring. I'm not going to, like, we're not going to um, approve this affordable housing development in this area because of the people that it's going to attract, and we don't want, this type of community living here, so we're not going to approve it. And but we're going to approve for this, yeah, McMansions or something, yeah, big old homes or neighborhoods or master plan communities. Not approving it because of, again, who might be living there is getting into, potentially that discriminatory issue against people due to their protected category. Whether it be race protected category, color, national origin, even, again, that includes, like all of those other ones. It's not specific over any race or color. No, criminal backgrounds are not protected under a protected category, but if the application of them is, and I say that where we like a housing provider that has, that turns away people who are Hispanic because they have a Class C misdemeanor conviction on their record, but doesn't turn away a white person that is doing it, then we have that. There's that discriminatory effect going on based on a protected category, because the application of that policy is being different, though a criminal record does not. But a lot of times, whether it's affordable housing, if it's the zoning for a new residential subdivision or community or multifamily dwelling, if it potentially, again, the intent and impact, if we could be discriminating against people because of who they are, based on that protected category, it could still be discrimination. We have to, biggest thing is making sure. And again, if I would, where's my mouth? All right. You can still do it at local government level, but you do have to, show that, like, hey, here's the reason we're doing it, and here's the evidence that supports that reason. I mean, you can still absolutely make it, but have that information at hand that, like, yeah, we know this might have a discriminatory effect, but this is the reasoning why we're doing it, and this is the good that is going to come from it, and this is, the evidence that supports that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm not seeing any hands raised or any questions in the chat. So I guess with that, I'll thank everyone for attending. And as a reminder, I will email the link to the slides from today's presentation to all of you who submitted an RSVP. I will also send a link to the recording once it's ready. If you did not RSVP and you would like to receive these emails, you can contact me via the email provided in the chat. And thank you again to everyone who joined today to listen. And many thanks to our speaker, Jeff, for taking the time to share this information with us today. So the webinar is now over. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.